My name is Amelia Grant, and I am 33 years old. For most of my life, I believed I had learned how to swallow the quiet humiliations that came from being the overlooked child in my family. I told myself that if I focused on my career and worked harder than anyone else, then eventually my parents would see me as worthy. I thought I had built armor strong enough to survive the cutting comments and the endless comparisons to my younger brother Daniel. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the day of his graduation from Stanford University. The morning of the ceremony was bright and clear. The campus lawns stretched out like emerald carpets beneath the California sun. Parents posed for photographs with their children in caps and gowns. Faculty members moved in clusters. Laughter floated through the air, and the smell of coffee and fresh-cut grass wrapped around everything. It should have been a moment of celebration for my family. Instead, it became the stage where every wound that had been festering for decades burst open. I sat near the front with my mother Sylvia and my father Richard. Daniel was radiant in his crimson gown, the tassels swinging proudly as he grinned for photographs. Everyone praised him. They said he was destined for greatness. They called him the golden child and the pride of the Grant family. I clapped politely, smiling for the cameras, but inside I felt the familiar ache of invisibility. After the ceremony ended, our family and dozens of friends gathered in the banquet hall. Round tables draped in white cloth filled the space. Silverware gleamed under chandeliers, and servers carried trays of sparkling cider and champagne. The air buzzed with congratulations. I told myself to keep my head down and simply get through the afternoon. Then my father raised his hand for attention. He stepped toward the microphone placed at the center of the stage. Conversations faded to silence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. His voice carried through the speakers, firm and confident. "Family means sacrifice," he said, "and today our Amelia will show her love in a way none of you will forget." I froze before he even finished the sentence. My chest tightened, and a cold shiver crawled across my skin. Then the words fell like a hammer. Out of love, Amelia has decided to buy her brother a brand new BMW. The applause exploded instantly. Chairs scraped back. People cheered. Guests stood to their feet, clapping wildly as if it were the happiest news of the afternoon. Daniel placed a hand to his mouth, feigning shock while the corners of his lips lifted in satisfaction. Cameras flashed to capture the supposed generosity. I stood stiffly and heard my own voice rise sharp and trembling but clear. "That is not true. I never agreed to that." The applause died. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A cousin muttered the word selfish. Another guest hissed that I was ruining Daniel's big day. I felt the weight of 100 stares pinning me to the floor. My mother looked away, her face tight with embarrassment. My father's expression darkened. His jaw clenched and his body went rigid. The silence pressed heavy until he moved. He stormed across the floor toward me, his eyes burning. Before I could step back, before anyone around me could react, his fist connected with my face. The impact cracked across my cheekbone and split the skin above my lip. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. A glass shattered against the floor. I stumbled backward, tasting blood as it ran hot and metallic into my mouth. My knees buckled and the room tilted. Phones were already lifted high, glowing red with recording lights. Guests stood frozen in shock, some covering their mouths, others clutching their children closer. I touched my face and saw the crimson stain blooming across my hand. The sight seared into me with brutal clarity. My father had struck me in front of everyone on the day meant to celebrate my brother. In that moment, my life split into before and after. I grew up in a home where the rules of value were written before I ever had the chance to prove myself. From the time I was old enough to understand words, my brother Daniel was the bright star and I was the shadow. Our parents, Richard and Sylvia, adored him. They called him their miracle child, their golden boy, their pride. Every photograph in our house seemed to feature Daniel at the center, with me blurred at the edge like a supporting character. When he learned to ride a bike, my father clapped so loudly the neighbors came out to watch. When I mastered multiplication at an age earlier than most kids, my mother said quietly, "Do not brag. Boys will not like you if you act too smart." That set the tone for the years that followed. Daniel was celebrated. I was corrected. He could stumble through a piano recital and be told he was talented. I could spend weeks building a model bridge out of cardboard and string, and my father would shake his head and say, "Amelia, stop wasting time." My earliest memories are filled with those little cuts that never healed. By the time Daniel was 10 and I was 13, the difference in how we were treated had become obvious even to outsiders. Relatives would come over for Thanksgiving and gush over his jokes, his smile, his charm. Then they would glance at me and ask if I had any new boyfriends, as if that was all that mattered. I tried to hide in books. I loved math and science. I loved the clean logic of equations, the way formulas always told the truth. But instead of encouragement, my mother warned me, "You are too serious, Amelia. No man will want a wife who spends her nights with textbooks." I learned quickly that ambition was something to be ashamed of if you were a girl in our family. The favoritism was not just emotional, it was financial. When Daniel wanted to play on the traveling soccer team, my parents insisted the family budget could handle it. New cleats, new uniforms, cross-country trips, everything was covered. When I asked for money to attend a summer STEM camp, my father barked that it was too expensive and unnecessary. The message was clear: resources flowed toward Daniel and away from me. By high school, Daniel had his first car, a shiny used Jeep that my parents bought him for his 16th birthday. They handed him the keys in the driveway, balloons tied to the antenna, while relatives cheered. I was 18 that year, already accepted into MIT, and my parents gave me a card with a $50 bill tucked inside. "Congratulations," they said, "but it is a shame you will be so far from home." That was the difference. He received vehicles and applause. I received warnings not to dream too big. Even so, I kept pushing. I joined every advanced placement class I could. I stayed late at school practicing calculus proofs until janitors turned off the lights. Teachers praised me for my focus and said I had a future in engineering. Yet every time I tried to share that joy with my family, I was met with dismissals. "Do not get too full of yourself, Amelia," my father would say. "Daniel is the one who will carry this family name." That declaration was repeated so often it became a mantra. By the time I was old enough to work part-time jobs, the pattern shifted into outright exploitation. My parents expected me to cover expenses that had nothing to do with me. When Daniel wanted to go to prom, my mother asked me to pay for his tuxedo rental since I was working at the local library. She said it would show sisterly love. When the family planned vacations, I was asked to contribute from my paychecks, even though I had no say in where we went. If I hesitated, my father accused me of being selfish. Again and again, I opened my wallet, hoping that maybe generosity would finally earn me approval. It never did. Instead, it reinforced their expectation that I was the family's bank account. My brother grew comfortable with that arrangement. He learned that if he asked long enough or complained loudly enough, someone else, usually me, would provide. When he was 17, he wanted a new stereo system for his car. I had just earned a scholarship check and was saving for books at MIT. My parents pressured me until I caved, handing over $300 that should have gone toward my education. Daniel hugged me once, then bragged to his friends that his sister always took care of him. I remember standing in the hallway that night, listening to him laugh with his friends while I sat alone in my room staring at an empty savings envelope. That was my childhood. My worth measured not by my achievements, but by how much I could sacrifice for the comfort of my brother. And yet, even as I tell this story, I know many outsiders never saw it. To them, we looked like a successful family. My father, a businessman respected in the community. My mother, active in church committees. Daniel, charming and popular. I played my part by keeping quiet and smiling in photographs. People assumed I was lucky. They never saw the nights I cried into my pillow, or the mornings I forced myself to swallow bitterness so the family peace could remain intact. The imbalance deepened as I grew older. Whenever I questioned it, my mother dismissed me with phrases like, "One day you will understand," or "Family always comes first." The problem was that family always coming first never meant all of us. It meant Daniel, the golden child, and me financing the gold. Looking back now, I see how those years trained me to endure far more than I should have. I learned to equate love with sacrifice and silence with survival. I learned to believe that no matter how much I achieved, it would never be enough to balance the scales against Daniel's charm. Those lessons shaped every decision I made as I stepped into adulthood. They shaped the resentment that burned quietly inside me. And they shaped the moment decades later when I finally stood up and said no in front of hundreds of witnesses. The punch at the graduation did not come out of nowhere. It was the violent climax of a story that had been building since I was a child, taught to give and give until nothing was left. When I left home at 18 with my acceptance letter to MIT, folded carefully inside my suitcase, I thought I was finally stepping into a world where effort and intelligence would matter more than charm and favoritism. Cambridge felt like another planet compared to the suburban house I had grown up in. The streets hummed with ambition. The classrooms buzzed with minds sharper than anything I had ever encountered. For the first time, my hunger to learn was not seen as a flaw. Professors encouraged me to push further. Classmates asked me to collaborate on projects because they respected my ideas, not because they wanted something for free. The transition was brutal. Studio classes demanded 70 hours a week. I slept under drafting tables and ate ramen between problem sets. Yet every night when exhaustion blurred my vision, I reminded myself that this was my choice. My path out of a life where I had been nothing but a supporting character in someone else's story. MIT taught me more than engineering. It taught me that resilience was a skill, that being underestimated could be fuel. By junior year, I was part of a research group developing small satellites for commercial use. We worked in labs that smelled of solder and coffee, designing systems that could one day orbit the Earth. My name appeared on research papers that industry leaders actually read. For the first time in my life, I felt visible. I called home to share the news. My father grunted that space was a waste of time and asked if I was dating anyone. My mother sighed that I should not let work consume me. Daniel, in contrast, had just joined a local college soccer team, and my parents bragged about him at every family gathering as if he had won a championship. I stopped calling as often. The distance between us widened not only in miles, but in values. After graduation, I joined an aerospace firm in San Francisco. The first months were grueling. 80-hour work weeks, back-to-back flights across the country, presentations to skeptical clients who looked at me and saw only a young woman they assumed would fold under pressure. But I did not fold. I delivered designs ahead of schedule. I stayed calm under interrogation. Slowly, my reputation grew. Colleagues began to trust me. Supervisors handed me projects no one else wanted. By my late 20s, I was leading design teams on multi-million-dollar contracts. My name appeared in trade journals. The salary I earned was far beyond anything I had imagined as a child counting pennies for my brother's tux rental. With my first substantial bonus, I made a decision that symbolized everything I had fought for. I bought my own apartment in San Francisco. It was not grand by market standards, just a modest 2-bedroom with wide windows overlooking the bay, but to me, it was a fortress. No one had given it to me. No one could claim credit for it. Every square foot was earned by sleepless nights and relentless determination. The day I signed the papers, I felt a surge of independence so powerful it nearly brought me to tears. I invited my parents to visit. They walked through the rooms politely, but with faint disapproval. My father asked why I needed so much space when I lived alone. My mother suggested I should have saved the money for Daniel's graduate school tuition. Daniel himself barely looked up from his phone. They dismissed the apartment as if it were irrelevant compared to the used car he had just purchased with my father's help. That moment crystallized something in me. I realized that no matter how high I climbed in my career, my family would always view my accomplishments as secondary to Daniel's smallest gestures. They could not or would not see me. Still, I pressed forward. Work became both my passion and my shield. I threw myself into projects designing satellite systems that would one day provide internet to rural areas, building launch schedules that required precision down to the second. The responsibility was crushing but exhilarating. My social life all but disappeared. Dating was almost impossible. Men bristled at my schedule. Some accused me of being cold when I refused to cancel meetings for dinner. Others told me flat out that my salary intimidated them. I grew accustomed to solitude. Colleagues became my closest friends. My apartment became both office and sanctuary. On weekends when deadlines allowed, I sat by the window with coffee staring at the bay and reminding myself that every sacrifice was worth it. I was building something no one could take from me. Yet my family found ways to diminish even that. At holiday gatherings, relatives asked Daniel about his soccer games or his latest job interview, while I sat quietly listening to my mother say she worried I was too picky to ever marry. Once at Thanksgiving, she declared in front of everyone that she feared I would die alone. The words stung, but I swallowed the pain and reached for cranberry sauce. Silence had become my survival strategy. What they never saw was the pride I carried in secret. Pride that my designs orbited the earth. Pride that companies sought my expertise. Pride that I had created stability for myself without relying on anyone. But every success seemed to trigger another demand from home. When Daniel wanted a new car, my father hinted that I should contribute. When the family planned vacations, I was asked to pay extra since I had a good job. Even from hundreds of miles away, the financial drain never stopped. Sometimes I gave in just to end the arguments. Sometimes I resisted and was branded selfish. The cycle never changed. What did change was me. Living in San Francisco, surrounded by people who respected my work, I began to recognize that the narrative I had been raised with was not universal. In my firm, ambition was praised, not punished. Boundaries were respected, not mocked. Slowly, I began to imagine a life where my worth was not measured by how much I gave up for Daniel. Still, the pull of family loyalty was strong. I told myself that one day they would understand. That one day they would see me not as a bank account, but as a daughter who had carved her own path. I did not yet know that the test of those boundaries would come in public with cameras recording and hundreds of witnesses watching. The graduation ambush was still years away, but the seeds had been planted. Every dismissal, every financial demand, every moment of invisibility was stacking like tinder waiting for a spark. When that spark came, it would not just ignite, it would explode. In the weeks leading up to Daniel's graduation, I sensed a storm brewing, though at first I tried to ignore it. My mother began dropping hints in her usual way, her voice soft but edged with expectation. She said things like, "A son's graduation is a milestone that deserves something unforgettable," or "A BMW would show the world how deeply his sister loves him." Each time she spoke, I felt my stomach knot, but I smiled tightly and redirected the conversation. I had learned long ago that open conflict with my parents rarely led anywhere good. Still, the hints grew sharper. One evening, my father forwarded an email to extended relatives. In it, he boasted that Amelia was going to surprise Daniel with a new BMW to mark his achievement. He wrote as though the decision had already been made, as though my wallet was theirs to command. I read the lines 3 times, my hands trembling. The message was copied to uncles, aunts, cousins, even distant family friends. Within minutes, congratulatory replies rolled in. They praised my generosity. They called me the best sister. I wanted to scream, but instead I shut my laptop and sat in silence, staring at the ceiling of my San Francisco apartment. That night, I could not sleep. I turned over memory after memory of times my family had volunteered my money or my time without ever asking me first. This was not new, but this time it was different. This time, the price was not a tuxedo rental or a vacation contribution. It was a luxury car worth tens of thousands of dollars. It was not just financial exploitation. It was erasure. They were writing me into a script where my role was once again to give while Daniel shined. When I finally confronted my mother by phone, her response chilled me. She laughed softly and said, "Amelia, do not be so dramatic. Everyone will admire you for this. Think of it as an investment in family unity." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. Investment. That was the word she used, as if my value existed only in what I could buy for others. I told her flatly, "I am not buying that car." She sighed heavily and accused me of being selfish. Then she hung up. The following week, Daniel called me himself. His tone was casual, almost mocking. He said, "Mom and Dad told me you were handling the car. I think a black BMW would be perfect. You always have good taste." I clenched my jaw and repeated that I was not paying for it. He chuckled as if he did not believe me and changed the subject to his soccer team. When the call ended, I stood at my window staring out at the bay lights flickering across the water. I felt trapped between 2 worlds. In one world, I was Amelia, the aerospace engineer, leading projects worth millions, trusted by colleagues, respected for my skill. In the other, I was still the daughter whose voice never mattered, the sister whose no was never heard. As the graduation date approached, the tension sharpened. My father reminded me in a phone call that family means sacrifice. My mother sent me photos of cars she thought Daniel might like. Each message chipped at my patience. I considered skipping the ceremony entirely, but something inside me refused. Why should I hide while they paraded Daniel's glory? Why should I erase myself to avoid their ambush? Instead, I chose to attend with my head held high. I told myself I would celebrate Daniel's day with dignity, but I would not surrender to their manipulation. Still, dread coiled in my stomach like a warning siren. I could already hear the echo of applause. I could see Daniel's smug smile. I could imagine my father's booming voice declaring my supposed generosity. I knew deep down that a confrontation was inevitable. I just did not know how violent or public it would become. That uncertainty haunted me in the days before I boarded the plane to Stanford. At night, I lay awake, replaying conversations, testing different responses in my mind. I thought maybe if I spoke calmly, maybe if I explained firmly, the situation could be contained. What I did not realize was that the stage had already been built, the script already written, and I was expected to play my part. The ambush was not a possibility. It was a certainty. The day of Daniel's graduation arrived with the kind of clear blue sky that seems designed for photographs. Stanford's campus glistened with banners and balloons. Families moved in cheerful clusters, snapping pictures, clapping as the graduates marched across the stage. My parents looked radiant, my mother in a pale blue dress and my father in a sharp gray suit. Daniel basked in the spotlight, shaking hands, posing for cameras, smiling as if the world had been created just for him. I reminded myself to breathe. I wanted to endure the day without letting dread consume me. The ceremony itself passed uneventfully. Daniel's name was called, applause roared, and my parents beamed as though he had been crowned king. The real storm began later during the reception in the banquet hall. Round tables draped in white cloths filled the space. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers. Waiters in black vests carried trays of sparkling cider. Guests mingled in elegant suits and dresses, their voices echoing with congratulations. I sat quietly near the front, my hands folded in my lap, rehearsing in my mind the words I might need to say. My father rose from his chair and strode toward the microphone at the center of the room. The chatter softened to silence. The sight of him standing tall at the podium sent a jolt of warning through me. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of performance. "Family means everything," he began, his voice amplified through the speakers. "And today, we prove it. Our daughter Amelia has chosen to celebrate her brother's milestone in the most generous way possible. She has decided to give him a brand new BMW." The words struck like lightning. For a moment, I could not breathe. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered. Chairs scraped back. Guests rose to their feet, cheering as if I had just pledged my life savings to world peace. Daniel covered his mouth in mock shock, though I caught the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. I stood stiffly, my pulse racing. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "That is not true. I never agreed to that." The applause faltered. Confusion rippled across the hall. A cousin whispered loudly that I must be joking. Another guest muttered that I was being selfish. Heads turned toward me with judgmental eyes. My mother's smile wavered into a scowl. Daniel's grin froze in place. My father's face darkened. He slammed his palm against the podium, the sound reverberating. "You will not embarrass this family today," he barked. His words hung in the air, thick with rage. I steadied my breath and answered clearly. "It is my money. I never agreed. It is not happening." Gasps scattered through the audience. A few guests shook their heads. Others murmured that money should never matter more than family. I felt the heat of hundreds of stares pressing down on me. The weight of silence was suffocating. Then it shattered. My father stepped away from the microphone and stormed toward me, his shoes striking the floor with heavy finality. His eyes burned with humiliation and fury. Before I could move, before anyone around me could react, His fist drove into my face. Pain exploded across my cheek. A metallic taste filled my mouth as blood surged from my split lip. Gasps turned to screams. A glass shattered against the floor as someone dropped their drink. I stumbled backward, my vision spinning, my knees weakening beneath me. The world blurred into flashes of shocked faces and glowing phone screens. A red recording light blinked above the crowd, capturing everything. I raised a trembling hand to my face and saw blood streaking my skin crimson against the pale fabric of my dress. The sight seared into my mind undeniable proof that my father had struck me in front of hundreds. Chaos erupted. Guests shouted. Some rushed forward but stopped short as though paralyzed by disbelief. Others pulled out phones, instinctively recording the spectacle rather than intervening. I could hear fragments of voices. Someone cried, "Call an ambulance." Another shouted, "What is wrong with him?" Somewhere in the crowd, Daniel stood frozen, his expression unreadable, while my mother hovered with her hands pressed to her mouth. The bystander effect rippled through the room. People hesitated, their shock anchoring them in place. I swayed, clinging to consciousness. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat echoing the word "no" that had triggered the violence. The chandeliers above blurred into halos of light. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, my body giving way. The last thing I saw before darkness closed in was a sea of glowing screens, the tiny red dots of live streams that would soon carry my humiliation and my truth far beyond the banquet hall. When consciousness returned, the first thing I noticed was the sterile white ceiling above me and the rhythmic beeping of a monitor. My body felt heavy, as if anchored to the bed by invisible chains. I turned my head slightly, and a sharp sting radiated from my cheek to my jaw. My lip throbbed. My nose burned. I reached up instinctively and felt rough bandages across my face. A nurse leaned into view, her eyes kind but firm. "Amelia, you are in Stanford Medical," she said softly. "You suffered a laceration on your lip and a hairline fracture in your nose, 8 stitches and some bruising, but you are stable." I blinked slowly, trying to absorb her words. Stable. The word should have comforted me, but it only deepened the ache in my chest. I whispered what happened, even though I already knew. She hesitated, then said, "Your family brought you here after you lost consciousness. The police have been notified." Her voice lowered. "Do you want to file this as assault?" The word sliced through me with brutal clarity. Assault! I nodded faintly, unable to trust my voice. My phone buzzed on the tray beside me. The nurse handed it over. The screen glowed with dozens of notifications. Missed calls from colleagues. Messages from numbers I did not recognize. And then, links. My thumb trembled as I tapped one open. Grainy footage filled the screen. There I was, standing in the banquet hall, refusing my father's announcement. My voice echoed as I said, "That is not true. I never agreed." Then the blow. The camera shook as the crowd gasped. My body reeled backward, blood blooming across my face. The comments beneath the video blurred together. Shock, outrage, disbelief. The hashtag #BMWBlood was already trending. I dropped the phone onto the blanket and covered my face with both hands. Humiliation surged hot through me, but beneath it, something else stirred. Relief. For the first time, the violence was undeniable. No whisper campaign, no family spin could erase what hundreds had witnessed and what thousands were now watching online. My father had struck me in public on the day meant to honor Daniel. That truth was etched in pixels forever. Tears threatened, but I forced them back. I had spent a lifetime hiding my pain, swallowing insults, pretending the imbalance was normal. But now the evidence was everywhere. The world could see. The door to silence had been ripped open. A doctor entered, clipboard in hand. He tested my memory, asked me to follow his finger with my eyes. Concussion symptoms, but manageable with rest. He cautioned that headaches might linger for weeks. He spoke clinically, but his eyes carried a weight of disapproval at what had been done to me. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Blows to the head can be fatal. You were lucky." His words sank into me like ice. Lucky. I thought of how easily the story could have ended in that hall with my name reduced to a footnote beneath my brother's shining day. My phone buzzed again. This time, I forced myself to look. Messages poured in from people I barely knew. Colleagues sent words of support. Former classmates wrote to say they were horrified. Even strangers messaged saying they had seen the footage and that I was not alone. For the first time, I felt a tide of validation rising against the years of dismissal. The nurse returned with water and I managed a sip. My throat was raw, my voice a rasp, but I asked quietly how many people have seen it. She glanced at my phone, then said gently, millions by now. News outlets are picking it up. My chest tightened. Millions! The humiliation deepened, but so did the certainty that the narrative was no longer controlled by my family. My father's fist had rewritten the story in front of the world. I closed my eyes and clutched the phone against my chest. Images replayed in my mind, the smug curve of Daniel's smile, the booming certainty of my father's voice, the gasps of guests, the flash of cameras, the crack of impact. My body trembled, but not just from pain. Anger coiled sharp and clear. For years, they had told me I was selfish. For years, they had erased my sacrifices. Now their cruelty was undeniable. I whispered to myself over and over, this is not the end. It cannot be the end. In that hospital bed with machines humming and strangers sending messages of solidarity, I made a vow. I would not let this be just another wound covered by silence. I would not let them spin it as a misunderstanding. This was assault. This was coercion. This was my breaking point and my beginning. The morning after the graduation, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the tray beside me. My face ached with every small movement and my head pulsed in slow waves, but I forced my hand to reach for it. Among the flood of notifications, one name froze me in place. Elena Chin. She was the CEO of the aerospace company where I had spent the last 5 years building my career. She was not just my boss, she was the woman who had first recognized my potential when I was still a junior engineer buried under endless schematics. Her message was brief but weighted with intent. I saw the footage. Do you want me to intervene? My breath caught. I stared at the words over and over. Part of me longed to hand everything to her, to let someone with authority carry the fight I was too exhausted to imagine. But another part of me hesitated. I remembered a conversation 2 years earlier when Elena had insisted on adding a clause to my employment contract. It had seemed odd at the time. The clause explicitly stated that any attempt by outside parties, including family, to financially coerce or manipulate me would trigger corporate protections. Elena had told me bluntly, I have seen too many brilliant women drained by relatives who felt entitled to their success. I want you protected. I had laughed nervously back then, insisting that my family was difficult but not dangerous. She had held my gaze and replied, Trust me, Amelia, it is better to prepare for storms before they arrive. Now that storm was here, and her foresight felt almost prophetic. I typed slowly with trembling fingers, not yet. Let them reveal their arrogance first. Seconds later, the phone rang. Elena's calm, steady voice filled my ear. Amelia, this footage is everywhere. This is not a story that will vanish overnight. You need to decide how you want to handle it. I closed my eyes, imagining the banquet hall again, the glowing phone screens, the gasps, the smear of blood on white linen. I whispered, I know. I am not ready. She did not push. Instead, she said, Remember, you are not alone. When you are ready, I will stand beside you. After the call ended, I lay back against the stiff pillows, staring at the ceiling tiles. Exhaustion pressed down on me, but so did clarity. If I let Elena march into the spotlight immediately, it would confirm every narrative my parents had used against me, that I was incapable of standing on my own, that I needed someone else to fight my battles. I wanted the world to see that I was not a pawn. I wanted to choose the moment and the terms. Still, I drew strength from her presence even at a distance. Knowing that she was willing to step in, that I had someone with power and credibility waiting in the wings, gave me a kind of confidence I had never felt before. My parents would double down. They always did. My mother would spin stories about ungrateful daughters. My father would hide behind silence or bluster. Daniel would smirk and pretend innocence, but this time the evidence was public. This time the tide was already shifting. Elena's voice echoed in my head. Trust me, it is better to prepare for storms before they arrive. I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not just reacting to their cruelty. I was planning, I was preparing, and soon I would fight back. 3 days after the graduation, the reception hall where the violence had occurred hosted another gathering, though this time the air carried a different weight. My parents had insisted on holding a follow-up celebration, claiming the family would not be defined by one misunderstanding. They wanted to control the story to erase the images already spreading across the internet. Guests arrived cautiously, their eyes darting with unease, their conversations hushed. Some came out of loyalty, others out of curiosity, but everyone carried a phone in hand. I hesitated outside the hall, my cheeks still bruised, faint purple shadows under my eyes, but I walked in with steady steps. I knew what was coming. Elena Chin had told me she would be there, and when she entered the room flanked by 2 corporate attorneys, the atmosphere shifted instantly. My father stiffened in his seat, his knuckles whitening around a glass of water. My mother forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. Daniel's grin faltered. Elena walked with quiet authority, her tailored suit crisp, her gaze unwavering. She carried no anger, only certainty. She stopped at the microphone, the same one my father had used to stage his ambush days earlier. Her voice was calm, but carried through the hall with piercing clarity. What happened here was not family sacrifice. It was financial coercion and assault. A ripple of shock ran through the guests. My mother stood quickly, her pearls clinking as she declared, "This is a private matter." Elena did not flinch. It became public the moment a man struck his daughter in front of hundreds and the moment that footage spread to millions. She lifted a hand and one of her attorneys tapped a tablet. A large screen lowered at the back of the hall. The video began to play. The room fell into silence, broken only by the grainy sounds of my father's announcement, then my refusal, then the sickening crack of his fist against my face. Gasps echoed, though most had seen it already. Seeing it on a giant screen with no way to look away forced every person in that room to confront the truth. Some covered their mouths, others shook their heads. Phones rose again, capturing the moment that the lie dissolved completely. When the video ended, Elena spoke again. Amelia is not selfish. She is strong. Strength is something too often punished when it comes from women. My mother's voice quivered as she spat. She is ungrateful, poisoned by her career. Elena's gaze did not waver. No, she is resilient and she will no longer be erased. The crowd shifted their eyes, moving from me to my parents, weighing everything they had believed against the evidence now undeniable. A murmur of agreement began to spread. Even relatives who had muttered selfish days before now looked down at their feet, unable to defend what they had witnessed. My father attempted to raise his voice low and angry. "You have no right to interfere in our family business." Elena's attorney stepped forward and placed a folder on the table before him. "This is not just family business. Amelia is a lead engineer on government-funded projects. Any attempt to financially coerce or endanger her triggers federal and corporate protections. The contract clauses are clear." He flipped the pages, showing signatures my own and Elena's from 2 years earlier. My father's face drained of color. He tried to bluster, but the words tangled. Elena turned toward the audience, her voice steady. "Ask yourselves what you saw. Did you see generosity refused or entitlement unmasked? Did you see a daughter betraying family or a father betraying trust?" Silence answered her. The weight of judgment filled the hall, thicker than the chandelier's glow. My mother tried once more, clinging to the narrative she had spun all my life. "Family always comes first." Elena replied with steel in her tone. "Family comes first only when it means respect and care, not when it demands violence and theft. Happiness built on exploitation is not happiness at all." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar as whispers about his complicity rose around him. Some guests began to leave quietly, unwilling to be part of the charade. Others stayed rooted to their chairs, their eyes wide as if history itself were unfolding before them. For me, standing near the back, every word, every glance felt like vindication. For once, the lies did not hold. For once, The weight of evidence crushed the facade my parents had built. Elena closed with words that etched themselves into me. Amelia will not stand alone. She has built her life through her own brilliance, and her choices will be respected. Anyone who attempts otherwise will face consequences, legal, professional, and personal. She stepped away from the microphone, leaving the silence heavy. The reckoning had begun. Guests whispered furiously. Some approached me quietly, offering words of support. Others avoided my eyes, ashamed of their earlier judgments. My parents sat rigid, my father staring at the papers before him, my mother clutching Daniel's hand as though he were still a child. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in their faces, not of me, but of losing control. And they were right. Control was slipping from their hands faster than they could grasp it. The video of my father striking me did not just live on phones anymore. Within hours of Elena's public confrontation, national news outlets replayed it on loop. Headlines screamed, "Father punches daughter over BMW. BMW at graduation." Hashtags multiplied across Twitter and Facebook. Hashtag BMW blood. Justice for Amelia. Family or exploitation. CNN aired a segment with slowed-down footage showing the exact moment his fist connected with my face, the crimson stain spreading across my lip, the stunned faces in the background. Commentators debated not only the violence but the deeper culture of entitlement families can impose on successful daughters. Every time I turned on the television, my humiliation replayed in grainy detail. And yet, beneath the shame, there was power. For once, the story was not twisted behind closed doors. For once, people saw the truth. The fallout began almost immediately. My father's real estate company, Whitman Development, had already been struggling under heavy debt. Now clients scrambled to sever ties. A luxury condo project downtown collapsed overnight after investors declared they could not risk association with a man under national scrutiny. A school board canceled a contract citing reputational damage. Emails leaked from staff begging for guidance on whether to stay or resign. Within a week, 6 major contracts worth millions evaporated. Employees resigned in waves, leaving the office half empty. Shareholders called for an emergency meeting demanding my father step down. He tried to issue a statement calling the incident a misunderstanding, but the video mocked his denial every time it played. The internet never forgets and never forgives quickly. My mother tried her own campaign. She wrote long posts on Facebook insisting I had always been selfish, that I had ruined Daniel's special day. Screenshots spread with mocking captions. Commenters wrote things like, "So now we know where he learned entitlement, or blood does not excuse abuse." Her words backfired. Instead of painting me as ungrateful, she cemented her own image as complicit. Daniel's life unraveled too. At first, he pretended to stay above the chaos, smiling in photos with friends who congratulated him on graduation. But the tide turned when students began whispering that he had stood by while his sister was attacked. Videos surfaced of him laughing with friends in the hallway after the ceremony, bragging about how everything would blow over. Those clips spread almost as fast as the original assault. His girlfriend broke up with him publicly on Instagram, writing, "I cannot be with someone who condones violence." Engagement rumors collapsed. Even his soccer teammates distanced themselves. Overnight, the golden child became radioactive. He withdrew from social media, but the screenshots circulated endlessly. My parents' circle of friends shrank rapidly. Invitations to parties dried up. Neighbors whispered as my mother walked to her car. At the grocery store, a stranger shouted shame at her. The social exile cut her deeper than she admitted. She called me late one night, her voice sharp with anger rather than remorse. "Are you happy now, Amelia?" she hissed. "You destroyed your brother's future. You destroyed this family." I listened in silence, then answered calmly, "No, I did not destroy anything. Dad's fist did. Your silence did. Daniel's smirk did. And the world saw it." She slammed the phone down. I did not cry. For once, her words did not pierce me. At work, meanwhile, Elena shielded me fiercely. She told reporters that I was a valued engineer, that I would not be giving interviews at this time. She arranged security for my apartment when threats began arriving from anonymous trolls who claimed family should be sacred no matter what. For every threat, though, there were hundreds of messages of support. Women wrote from across the country saying they too had been forced to fund siblings or endure favoritism. Survivors of domestic violence told me that my refusal had given them courage. I scrolled through these words late at night, my bruises still tender but my heart steadier than it had ever been. Then came the shareholder meeting. It was streamed live to reporters. My father sat stiff at the head of the table, his jaw locked. Shareholders accused him of reckless behavior, of shaming the company, of driving contracts into the ground. He tried to deflect, saying it was a personal matter. One investor snapped, "Your personal matter lost us $40 million in a week." When the vote was taken, the result was decisive. He was forced to resign as CEO. News outlets reported it within minutes. Whitman Development stock plummeted. My father left the building pale and silent, his empire collapsing behind him. Daniel tried to defend him on social media, claiming the video exaggerated what happened. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Screenshots of the high-definition footage flooded his replies. Memes compared his excuses to saying the sky was green. Within hours, he deleted his accounts. Meanwhile, the story continued to ripple outward. Colleges invited me to speak to students about boundaries and resilience. Journalists begged for interviews, though I declined most. Instead, I issued a single written statement. Family does not excuse exploitation. Boundaries are not selfish. They are survival. The statement was shared tens of thousands of times. For once, my own words, not my parents' spin, defined the narrative. But the collapse at home grew darker. My father's drinking increased behind closed doors, though I avoided details. My mother blamed everyone but him. Daniel retreated further into bitterness. I received one text from him weeks later that said, "You ruined everything." I stared at it for a long time before replying, "You chose silence." He never wrote again. In the middle of this chaos, my apartment became a fortress. Friends brought food, flowers, messages of encouragement. Colleagues checked in daily. Elena visited one evening carrying a bottle of tea and a quiet smile. She told me, "Amelia, you do not need to prove anything to them anymore. You already proved yourself to the world." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I realized then that chosen family could matter more than blood. The collapse of my parents' empire was fast and merciless, but the rise of my own identity was slower, steadier, built on every message of solidarity and every boundary I finally enforced. I knew there would be more battles ahead, court cases, police interviews, public scrutiny, but the balance had shifted permanently. No one could erase the footage. No one could rewrite the narrative. My father's punch had destroyed the illusion of our perfect family, but it had also freed me from a lifetime of silence. As weeks turned to months, the consequences piled higher. Vendors demanded payment for wedding services my parents could no longer afford. Daniel lost a job offer after the hiring manager recognized his name from the news. My mother clung to denial, refusing to admit the truth even as her social circle vanished. But I no longer carried their weight. I had chosen myself. And for the first time, that choice was validated not only by strangers, but by the crumbling of the system that had always demanded my sacrifice. In the months after the collapse of my father's company, I rebuilt my life piece by piece, determined that the assault would not be the final chapter of my story. The bruises on my face faded slowly until only faint traces remained, but the deeper change was inside me. For the first time, I no longer felt like I was carrying the burden of silence. The world had seen the truth, and there was no going back. I returned to work at the aerospace firm with a renewed sense of purpose. Elena promoted me to Director of Global Projects, a position that gave me oversight of teams across 3 continents. The salary doubled, and with it came stock options and influence. Yet what mattered more was her unwavering confidence in me. She introduced me at board meetings as a leader, not as a survivor. That distinction reminded me daily that my identity was not confined to the violence of one night. With the promotion came resources, and I chose to direct some of them outward. I established a scholarship fund for young women in STEM, especially those from families that did not believe in their potential. I called it the No Means No Foundation. The name carried the weight of that moment when I said no to my father in the banquet hall and paid for it in blood. Now that word became a banner of empowerment. Applications poured in from across the country. Reading the letters from girls who longed to be engineers, scientists, coders made me feel that my suffering had been transformed into something larger than myself. At home, I strengthened my independence. I cut off financial ties to my parents completely. I blocked their numbers for weeks at a time when the harassment grew unbearable. Daniel disappeared from my life entirely. My mother tried once more to contact me, sending a long email filled with accusations about betrayal and selfishness. I never replied. I realized that engaging only fed the cycle. Instead, I poured my energy into building community where respect flowed freely. Friends gathered often at my apartment, sharing laughter, wine, and warmth that had been absent from my childhood home. Colleagues invited me into their families. Elena and her daughters included me in holiday dinners, where ambition was celebrated, not scorned. Slowly, the wounds began to scar over. Therapy helped me process the years of favoritism and coercion. My therapist reminded me again and again that boundaries were not cruelty, they were survival. I practiced saying no in small ways, declining invitations I did not want, accepting only responsibilities that aligned with my values. Each refusal felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself. I also returned to the work that had first given me peace, designing satellites that bridged communities across the globe. On quiet nights, I stood on my balcony with a telescope tracking the slow glide of the systems my teams had built. Somewhere, thousands of miles above me, my work orbited silently, proof that my impact reached far beyond the toxic circle of my family. The resolution was not loud or sudden. It was the steady layering of choices. Choosing to wake each morning and pour coffee without dread. Choosing to invest in students who reminded me of the girl I had once been. Choosing to surround myself with people who respected boundaries. Choosing to let the old expectations crumble without me holding them up. I thought often of the banquet hall, of the chandeliers, of the stunned silence after the blow. For years, that memory haunted me, but gradually it shifted. Instead of seeing only humiliation, I saw the moment I refused to surrender. That refusal had cost me blood and stitches, but it had also ignited a fire that built the life I now lived. Independence was no longer a fragile apartment bought in secret. It was a network of colleagues, allies, and friends who saw me clearly. It was the knowledge that I could say no and still be whole. In those choices lay my resolution. I had not only survived, I had built a life on my own terms, and that was something no father's fist could ever erase. Looking back now, with distance and clarity, I see that my life split the moment my father's fist struck me at Daniel's graduation. For years, I had lived in a cycle of silence, enduring the favoritism that elevated my brother while reducing me to a wallet and a shadow. I had convinced myself that swallowing bitterness was easier than confrontation, that sacrifice was the only way to keep some fragile peace. But that night, the illusion shattered. The cameras captured what I had always known, and the world confirmed it. Family does not excuse exploitation. Love without respect is not love at all. I share this story not to invite pity, but to speak directly to anyone who has been told that saying no is selfish or that boundaries are betrayal. Hear me clearly. Boundaries are not selfish. They are survival. They are the declaration that your life and your labor belong to you. For too long, I believed that rejecting my family's demands made me cold. I was told that my ambition made me unlovable, that my independence made me less of a daughter. But the truth is that silence would have destroyed me far more thoroughly than speaking up ever could. When my father struck me in front of hundreds, he revealed more than his rage. He revealed the entitlement that had been rotting our family from within for decades. And when the footage spread across the world, it became proof not only of his violence, but of my refusal to submit. To everyone who has written to me or shared their own stories of being drained by those closest to them, I want you to know that you are not alone. There are communities, strangers, colleagues, friends who will stand with you when blood relatives do not. Chosen family is as real as any genetic tie, sometimes more real. Because respect, not blood, is what defines true family. The scars on my face have faded, but they remain faint reminders of the night I finally chose myself. I see them in the mirror, and instead of shame, I feel strength. They mark survival, not defeat. They remind me that even in the face of public humiliation, I stood my ground, and that decision reshaped my life. To those still trapped in cycles of coercion or favoritism, I say this. You do not owe your achievements to those who mocked your efforts. You do not need to fund dreams that are not yours. You do not have to hand over what you earned just because someone claims family deserves it. And you never need to accept violence in the name of peace. If anything in my story resonates with you, I ask you to take one small step today. Speak your boundary aloud. Share your story with someone you trust. Refuse one demand that strips you of dignity. Each act of refusal is a brick in the foundation of your independence. My father's empire collapsed because he built it on entitlement. My life flourished because I chose to build it on resilience. That contrast is the final lesson I want to leave with you. So I ask you now, if you believe boundaries matter, type justice in the comments below. Tell me where you are listening from, because I want to know how far these stories reach. And if you have faced something similar, share it. Speaking truth breaks the silence that allows cruelty to grow. Subscribe if you want more stories that honor strength, resilience, and the power of choosing yourself. Are you with me in saying that blood does not excuse abuse? Are you Team Amelia for standing firm, or do you believe family should always come first, even when it demands your dignity? That conversation matters because too many are still told that sacrifice is the price of love. Let us challenge that together. Remember, above all, your peace is not negotiable, your dignity is not disposable, and your life belongs to you, not to those who would take it for their own comfort. I chose myself that day, and I will keep choosing myself every day after. You can too.